Below the forgotten crypts of St. Jude's Cemetery, a creature of nightmare was chained inside a solid iron coffin. They left him there to starve for eternity. He was a monster to the world, but to the blind girl walking above, his desperate whispers sounded exactly like salvation. If you look through the historical archives of Duxbury, Massachusetts, around the year 1894, you will find meticulous records of a wealthy industrialist named Alistair Ashford. According to the town ledgers, Ashford was a philanthropist who single-handedly funded the local orphanage, the cobblestone roads, and the sprawling county hospital. But in late October of that year, the records abruptly state that Ashford liquidated his assets and fled to Europe in the dead of night, never to return. That is the official story. The truth, however, is buried much deeper, about 6 feet beneath the stone floor of the abandoned Vanderbilt family mausoleum. Alistair Ashford did not board a ship to Europe. He was a vampire king, an ancient being who had grown weary of violence and sought only a quiet, civilized existence in the New World. For decades, he had lived peacefully, hiding his true nature and feeding only on the livestock from his vast estates. But humanity's greed is often more monstrous than any creature of the night. The town's elite, led by Mayor Reginald Cobble and Dr. Arthur Pendleton, discovered Alistair's secret. They didn't uncover it through brave detective work, but through cowardly snooping into his private medical journals. Realizing that Alistair was immortal and possessed centuries of accumulated wealth, a sinister plot was hatched. They knew they couldn't simply shoot or stab a vampire of his royal lineage. So they invited him to a lavish Thanksgiving banquet, poisoning his wine with high doses of liquid silver and dead man's blood, a paralytic cocktail for his kind. As Alistair collapsed, unable to move but completely conscious, Cobble and Pendleton stripped him of his estate keys, bound him in heavy silver-laced iron chains, and dragged him to St. Jude's Cemetery. They locked him inside a solid iron casket, welded the seams shut, and buried him alive beneath the mausoleum. They intended for him to suffer the ultimate agony, an immortal creature, slowly desiccating, starving in pitch darkness for eternity, while they grew fat on his fortune. For 3 long, agonizing months, Alistair lay in the suffocating blackness. His skin turned to dry parchment. His immense strength faded to nothing. The heavy iron pressed against his chest, and the silence was maddening. He screamed until his vocal cords tore, but no one could hear him through the iron, the 6 feet of packed earth, and the heavy stone floor above. No one, that is, except Hazel. Hazel Bennett was 20 years old, and she had been completely blind since a severe bout of scarlet fever took her sight at the age of 7. Orphaned and destitute, she lived on the extreme fringes of Duxbury society. To survive, Hazel worked for the local apothecary, Mr. Elias Harland, weaving baskets and foraging for rare herbs. Because she lacked sight, Hazel's other senses had heightened to an almost supernatural degree. She could identify the exact species of a flower just by the subtle friction of its petals, and she could navigate the dense woods by listening to the way the wind wrapped around the tree trunks. Her absolute favorite place to forage was St. Jude's Cemetery. The soil there was incredibly rich, producing the finest night-blooming jasmine and valerian root in the county. It was quiet, peaceful, and the dead never judged her ragged clothes or her milky, unseeing eyes. On a frigid Tuesday night in late January, Hazel was kneeling on the cold marble floor of the ruined Vanderbilt mausoleum. She was carefully tracing the cracks in the stone, searching for a specific type of moss that Harland paid a premium for. As her bare fingers brushed against a deep structural fissure in the marble, a crack caused by the settling earth from the hasty burial beneath it, she felt a strange vibration. It wasn't the rumbling of a passing carriage. It was rhythmic, desperate. Hazel pressed her ear against the freezing stone. Her brow furrowed. Beneath the layers of rock and dirt, she could hear a faint metallic scraping, and then a sound that made her heart skip a beat. It was a voice, a man's voice, raspy, broken, and agonizingly weak, vibrating up through the fissure in the earth. "Is anyone there?" Most people would have run screaming, believing it to be a ghost or a demon. But Hazel's life had taught her that the real monsters were the men who ignored beggars in the street and the boys who threw stones at her because she was blind. The voice beneath the stone didn't sound evil. It sounded profoundly, heartbreakingly alone. Hazel leaned closer to the crack, cupping her hands around her mouth to direct the sound downward. "I hear you," she whispered into the dark. "Who are you?" Down in the suffocating dark of the iron coffin, Alistair Ashford froze. For 90 days, he had experienced nothing but the relentless torment of his own agonizing hunger and the absolute silence of the grave. He thought his mind had finally snapped. He thought the voice of an angel was hallucinating his salvation. "Please," Alistair rasped, channeling every remaining ounce of his supernatural energy into projecting his voice up the narrow ventilation fissure that the clumsy gravediggers had inadvertently left open. "My name is Alistair. I am buried beneath you. They locked me in. Please, you must bring help." Above ground, Hazel sat back on her heels, her mind racing. Alistair. The town had been told that the great philanthropist Alistair Ashford had moved to France months ago. "Mr. Ashford," Hazel called down, keeping her voice low so it wouldn't carry across the cemetery. "The town said you left. Mayor Cobble took over your estate." A bitter, dry laugh echoed up through the crack, sounding like crumbling autumn leaves. "Cobble, that treacherous coward. He poisoned me. He stole everything. And he buried me alive in this iron box." Hazel's hands trembled. The cruelty of it was staggering. She didn't doubt him for a second. She had personally heard Mayor Cobble sneer at the poor and kick stray dogs into the street. The idea that he would murder a man for his wealth made perfect, horrifying sense. "I need to go to the police," Hazel said, starting to stand up. "I'll bring the sheriff, Mr. Ashford." "Hold on. No!" The desperation in Alistair's voice was so intense, it physically vibrated the stone beneath Hazel's knees. "The sheriff is Cobble's cousin. They are all in on it, little one. If you tell them, they will know I am still alive. They will dig me up just to burn me to ashes. You cannot tell anyone." Hazel knelt back down, her fingers gripping her ragged shawl. "Then how do I get you out? I'm blind, Mr. Ashford. I'm a poor, blind girl. I don't have the strength to dig through a stone floor and 6 feet of frozen earth." A heavy silence fell between them. Down in the dark, Alistair felt a crushing wave of despair. A blind girl. Fate had sent him someone with a pure heart, but without the physical means to break through the iron. Yet, as he focused his heightened vampire hearing, he could hear the frantic, empathetic beating of her heart. He could smell the faint scent of jasmine and rain on her skin. "What is your name?" Alistair asked hard, his voice softening, dropping the commanding tone of a king for the vulnerability of a dying man. "Hazel. Hazel Bennett." "Hazel, you have already saved me just by answering. To know I am not screaming into an empty void, it is a mercy I cannot repay. But you must go. If they find you here, talking to the ground, they will kill you too." "I'm not leaving you," Hazel said fiercely. She had been abandoned by the world. She knew exactly how it felt to be left in the dark. I may not be able to dig you out tonight, but I am not leaving you to die. What do you need? How can I keep you alive until we figure this out? Alistair hesitated. To survive, to regain even a fraction of his strength to break the iron from the inside, he needed one thing: blood. But how could he ask this innocent girl for such a grotesque thing? If he told her what he truly was, she would surely flee. I am deeply dehydrated, Hazel. I need sustenance, but not food. Water? She asked, reaching for her canteen. No, Alistair admitted, shame coloring his dry words. Hazel, I must confess something to you. I am not entirely human. If I were, I would have suffocated in this box months ago. I am a vampire. Please don't run. Hazel didn't run. She sat in the freezing cemetery, processing the impossible words. A vampire. The stories from her childhood told of vicious, blood-sucking fiends. Yet this man had built the hospital where her mother was treated before she died. He had built the orphanage that gave Hazel shelter during the harshest winters. If this was a monster, he was a remarkably kind one. You need blood, Hazel said matter-of-factly, her voice remarkably steady. Alistair was stunned by her calm. Yes, animal blood will suffice. Anything. If I have enough, I may be able to regain enough strength to shatter these silver chains. But the fissure is too narrow to pass anything solid. I work for an apothecary, and I help the local butcher clean his shop on Thursdays in exchange for scraps, Hazel deduced quickly. I can get pig's blood. I can funnel it down this crack in the stone. Will it reach you? The crack leads directly to a fractured seam in the iron box. Yes, it will reach me. Over the next 3 weeks, a strange, beautiful, and dangerous routine began. Every night at midnight, Hazel would navigate the treacherous, snow-covered paths to St. Jude's Cemetery. She smuggled glass bottles filled with fresh animal blood, carefully pouring the crimson liquid down the narrow fissure in the Vanderbilt crypt. As the blood seeped into the iron coffin, Alistair drank from the rusted seams. With each passing night, his strength slowly began to return. His parched skin healed, his muscles expanded, and the agonizing fog in his mind lifted. And as he healed physically, something else blossomed between them. Unable to see him, and unable for him to see her, they fell in love through the purity of conversation. Alistair told Hazel about the grand cities of Europe, the smell of the ocean off the coast of Marseille, and the exact shade of the sunset over the Alps. He painted a vibrant world for her in the theatre of her mind. In return, Hazel taught him how to truly listen. She described the symphony of the town awakening, the texture of frost on the gravestones, and the emotional resilience required to survive in a world that refused to look at her. Alistair realized that for 300 years he had been walking the earth with his eyes wide open, yet he hadn't truly seen the beauty of the world until a blind girl described it to him. When I get out of here, Hazel, Alistair whispered one night, his voice now rich, deep, and impossibly smooth. I will give you the world. I will take you to every place I have described, and I will make those men pay for what they took from us. Hazel leaned against the cold stone, a sad smile on her lips. They won't let us just walk away, Alistair. You don't know what happened today. Down below, Alistair's newly strengthened muscles tensed against his silver chains. What happened, my love? Dr. Pendleton came into the apothecary, Hazel said, her voice trembling slightly. I heard him talking to Harland. They've been searching your estate for 3 months for the key to your underground vault in Boston. They can't find it. Pendleton thinks you swallowed it before they poisoned you." Alistair's eyes snapped open in the pitch black. He had swallowed it. "Pendleton told Harland they are coming to the cemetery tomorrow night," Hazel whispered, a tear slipping from her unseeing eyes. "They are bringing sledgehammers, Alistair. They are going to dig you up, cut you open to get the key, and then burn your body to ash. We are out of time." The freezing wind howled through the gravestones of St. Jude's Cemetery, carrying with it the bitter promise of a blizzard. It was Wednesday night, less than 24 hours since Hazel had warned Alistair of the impending desecration. She stood defiantly in the center of the ruined Vanderbilt mausoleum, her thin woolen coat offering zero protection against the biting cold. She had nowhere else to go, and even if she did, she would never abandon the man buried beneath her feet. For hours, the only sound had been the scraping of bare branches against the stone walls. Then, Hazel's heightened hearing picked up the crunch of heavy boots on the snow, followed by the metallic clinking of pickaxes, shovels, and iron crowbars. They were coming. "Mr. Ashford," Hazel whispered frantically, dropping to her knees and pressing her lips against the fissure in the marble. "They are here. I hear at least 5 men. Please, tell me you have your strength." Down in the suffocating darkness of the iron coffin, Alistair strained against the heavy, silver-laced chains binding his wrists and chest. The animal blood Hazel had provided over the past 3 weeks had healed his desiccated flesh and cleared his mind. But it was not enough. Animal blood was a mere echo of life. It lacked the raw, vital energy required to overcome the burning paralysis of pure silver. Every time he flexed his muscles, the silver seared into his skin, hissing and smoking in the enclosed space. "Hazel, you must flee," Alistair's voice echoed up, laced with genuine terror. Not for himself, but for her. "I cannot break the silver. The animal blood. It is too weak. If they find you here, they will not show mercy. Run into the woods. Hide, my love." "I told you," Hazel said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I am not leaving you in the dark." Before Alistair could beg her again, the heavy iron gates of the mausoleum shrieked open on rusted hinges. "Well, well. What do we have here?" The voice belonged to Mayor Reginald Cobble. It was dripping with arrogant amusement, thick with the scent of expensive brandy and cheap cigars. Beside him stood Dr. Arthur Pendleton, carrying a leather medical bag that rattled with bone saws and surgical spreaders. Behind them lumbered 3 heavy-set men from the local docks, hired for their brawn and their ability to keep their mouths shut. But there was a 4th man with them, and when he spoke, Hazel's heart shattered. "I told you she was sneaking out at night," Mr. Elias Harland, the apothecary, said nervously. "I followed her last week. She's been talking to the ground, Mayor. I swear it." "You sold me out for what, Mr. Harland?" Hazel asked, her unseeing eyes staring straight ahead. "A handful of silver coins." "Get out of the way, you blind wretch," Harland spat, stepping back to let the dockworkers pass. Mayor Cobble stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing on the marble. "Move along, Hazel. You're trespassing on private town property. We have some structural repairs to make to the foundation." "There is a man buried under here," Hazel screamed, hoping the sound would carry to the road, even though she knew it was miles away. "Mayor Cobble poisoned Alistair Ashford and buried him alive. Murderers!" Cobble's face instantly lost its smirk. He snapped his fingers. "Shut her up. Now!" One of the dock workers lunged forward, grabbing Hazel roughly by the hair and hurling her across the mausoleum. She hit the stone wall with a sickening thud, a sharp cry escaping her lips before she collapsed to the floor. A deep gash opened on her forehead, and a stream of warm, crimson blood trickled down her pale face, dripping onto the icy marble floor right beside the fissure. 6 feet below, in the suffocating silence of the coffin, Alistair heard her scream. The sound tore through his soul like a jagged blade. For 300 years, he had controlled his monstrous nature, burying his predatory instincts beneath a veneer of civilization. But hearing the only pure thing in his world being brutalized stripped away every ounce of his humanity. Then a single drop of Hazel's blood fell through the fissure. It hit the rusted lid of the iron casket and seeped through the crack. As the scent hit Alistair's senses, time stopped. Human blood, her blood, rich with adrenaline, fear, and unparalleled love, acted as a supreme catalyst. The scent alone was a concussive blast of ancient power to a starving vampire king. His eyes, previously a dull human brown, ignited into a terrifying, luminous crimson. The paralysis of the dead man's blood vanished, eradicated by the pure, terrifying adrenaline of a predator protecting its mate. Up above, Mayor Cobble gestured impatiently to the floor. "Smash it open. Dig him up. Dr. Pendleton needs to cut the vault key out of his miserable stomach before the sun comes up." The dock workers raised their heavy sledgehammers and brought them down on the marble floor. Crack. The ancient stone splintered. They swung again. Crash. The floor caved in, revealing the frozen, packed dirt below. For 30 grueling minutes, they dug with shovels and pickaxes, tossing heavy clumps of frozen earth over their shoulders, while Hazel lay semi-conscious in the corner, her head spinning, silently praying for a miracle. "I hear metal," one of the workers grunted, his shovel clanging against the heavy iron lid. "Excellent," Dr. Pendleton said, stepping to the edge of the pit and opening his medical bag. He pulled out a heavy, serrated sternum saw. "Sweep the dirt off the welding seams. Bring the crowbars." Down below, Alistair felt the dirt shift. The pressure on the lid lightened. He looked at the heavy silver chains wrapping his chest and arms. They were searing his flesh, but he no longer felt the pain. He only felt absolute, blinding rage. He took a slow, deep breath, expanding his chest. Snap! Alistair flexed his arms with unimaginable, supernatural force. The silver chains, forged to hold a beast, groaned, stretched and then shattered into dozens of fragmented pieces, raining down uselessly in the dark. He was free. The 3 dock workers wedged heavy iron crowbars under the lid of the casket. Mayor Cobble stood at the edge of the 6-foot grave, holding a kerosene lantern to illuminate the prize. "On 3, Cobble commanded, his eyes wide with greed. 1, 2, 3, heave! The men pushed down on the crowbars. The welded seams, already rusted and compromised from the winter moisture, groaned loudly and snapped. "We got it!" the largest worker shouted. "Pull the lid back!" They grabbed the heavy iron lid and hauled it backward, expecting to find the withered, decaying corpse of Alistair Ashford. Cobble leaned over the pit, a victorious grin plastered across his face, ready to claim the key to a limitless fortune. But the coffin was empty. Cobble blinked, lowering the lantern into the grave. "What the? Where is he?" "He was right." Before Cobble could finish his sentence, a hand shot out from the shadows of the pit. It wasn't the weak, bony hand of a starved man. It was a blur of raw, terrifying power, fingers like steel vices clamped around the throat of the largest dock worker. In a fraction of a second, the 250-pound man was violently yanked down into the grave. A sickening, wet crunch echoed through the mausoleum, followed instantly by absolute silence. Panic erupted. The remaining 2 dock workers scrambled backward, dropping their tools. Dr. Pendleton dropped his bone saw, his face draining of all color. "Impossible," he whispered. "The poison. The silver." From the depths of the iron pit, a figure rose. Alistair Ashford levitated out of the grave, his feet touching the shattered marble floor, without making a single sound. He was a terrifying sight. His tailored suit was ruined, hanging in rags over his frame. His skin was pale as moonlight, smeared with dirt and the fresh blood of the dock worker. But it was his eyes that froze the men in place, burning, unholy red, radiating a fury that transcended the mortal realm. "Pendleton," Alistair said, his voice a dark, booming baritone that shook the dust from the ceiling. "Cobble, you have interrupted my rest." The 2 remaining dock workers screamed and bolted for the heavy iron doors. Alistair didn't even look at them. He merely flicked his wrist. The massive iron gates slammed shut with the force of a cannon blast, the metal locking mechanism warping and fusing together under his telekinetic grip. "No, no, no!" Mayor Cobble shrieked, backing away and drawing a silver-plated revolver from his coat. He fired 3 times. Bang, bang, bang. The bullets struck Alistair square in the chest. He didn't even flinch. He stepped forward, the wounds already closing, expelling the flattened silver slugs onto the floor with soft clinks. Alistair moved faster than the human eye could track. He appeared directly in front of Dr. Pendleton. The doctor let out a high-pitched whimper before Alistair's hand wrapped around his jaw. "You wanted to look inside my stomach, Doctor," Alistair whispered, his fangs extending, gleaming like polished ivory in the lantern light. "Let us see what is inside yours." Hazel, lying in the corner, covered her ears. But she could not block out the wet, tearing sounds, or the horrifying, abbreviated screams that followed. She pressed her face against the freezing marble, trembling violently. She was not afraid of Alistair, but the sheer, brutal violence of the act was overwhelming. It was the sound of nature balancing the scales, of a predator finally unleashed upon its tormentors. Within 90 seconds, the mausoleum was dead silent, save for the heavy, ragged breathing of Mr. Elias Harland. The apothecary was backed into a corner, weeping uncontrollably, begging for his life. Alistair slowly turned toward Harland, his face a mask of cold vengeance. He took a step forward. "Alistair, stop." The voice was incredibly weak, but to Alistair's ears, it rang out like a church bell. He stopped instantly, the bloodlust receding as he looked toward the corner. Hazel was trying to push herself up, her unseeing eyes wide, blood still leaking from her forehead. The crimson faded from Alistair's eyes, returning to a warm, gentle brown. The monster vanished, and the gentleman returned. He crossed the room in a blur, dropping to his knees beside her. He carefully removed his tattered overcoat, wrapping it around her shivering shoulders. "I am here, Hazel," Alistair whispered softly, his cold hands gently cupping her face. He inspected the gash on her forehead, his thumb carefully wiping away the blood. "I am so sorry you had to hear that. I promised to protect you." Hazel leaned into his touch. His hands were freezing, but they felt safer than anything she had ever known. "Are they? They will never hurt anyone again," Alistair confirmed quietly. He looked over his shoulder at the cowering apothecary. "Mr. Harland, you are going to go to the sheriff. You are going to tell him that Mayor Cobble and Dr. Pendleton were murdered by grave robbers, and that you barely escaped with your life. If you ever speak Hazel's name, or mine, I will not need to hunt you down. I will simply wait in the dark of your bedroom." Harland nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, grave robbers, I swear it." Alistair effortlessly scooped Hazel up into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "We are leaving Duxbury, Hazel. Tonight." "Where will we go?" she asked, resting her head against his shoulder, exhaustion finally overtaking her. "First to Boston," Alistair replied, carrying her out of the ruined mausoleum and into the blinding winter snowstorm. "I have a vault at the Old Colony Trust Company that Mayor Cobble was too incompetent to access, and then I promised you the world. We shall start with the coast of Marseille." Historical records from the late 19th century hold a very peculiar footnote. In February of 1895, a man bearing a striking resemblance to the supposedly vanished Alistair Ashford walked into the Old Colony Trust Company in Boston. He presented a unique, stomach acid-stained skeleton key, withdrew over $4 million in gold-bearer bonds, and vanished completely. 3 days later, passenger manifests for the RMS Umbria, sailing out of New York for the shores of Europe, listed a Mr. A. Ashford traveling in the first-class staterooms, accompanied by a young, legally blind woman listed simply as his bride. Back in Duxbury, the town fell into chaos, with Mayor Cobble and Dr. Pendleton found brutally dismembered in the cemetery. The town's corrupt leadership dissolved. The fortune they had hoarded was seized by the state, and the town never fully recovered its former glory. The iron coffin beneath the Vanderbilt mausoleum was removed and melted down, the townspeople desperate to erase the terrifying evidence of whatever beast had escaped it. But the legend remained. To this day, if you visit the snow-covered ruins of St. Jude's Cemetery in the dead of winter, the locals will tell you not to stand too close to the ancient crypts. They say that if you listen closely to the cracks in the stone, you might hear the faint, echoing whispers of the monster who was buried alive and the brave, blind girl who loved him enough to set him free. Did Alistair and Hazel truly vanish into the European sunset? History shows Alistair's massive fortune disappeared overnight, and a blind girl from Duxbury was never seen again. If you were captivated by this dark romance and want more thrilling, hidden tales from history, hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for weekly deep dives into the unknown. Leave a comment below on what you would do in Hazel's shoes.